Hello my viewers, I hope you're doing fine. I am back with another video by R.E.P.A.R.A.T.I.O.N, and in this video she explains or replies rather to a few comments about people asking about reparations, or who is supposed to receive reparations when their ancestors were stolen by the Vikings as slaves. She also talks about class unity, and she explains how throughout United States history, European Americans have been upholding systems of oppression that harm people of the global majority, and how people of the global majority have not upheld systems of oppression that harm European Americans. And she talks about a lot of interesting things. More reason you need to watch this video to the end. For now, let's take a look at these videos and talk more afterwards.
This feeling of amazement that you're experiencing, get used to it. You need to get used to it. And the thing is, you are not being oppressed. You are okay. Your standing in society, your ability to flow through society, your access to resources is not being negatively impacted. You are not being invalidated for being white. The issue is, because you are white, you feel entitled to having opinions about everything. And you feel entitled to having those opinions validated, and you feel entitled to having those opinions be given equal consideration to the lived experience of other people, even when your opinions are about things that have nothing to do with you. In this case, reparations for Black Americans. Please take some time to reflect on how ridiculous it is that you are claiming that because you are a taxpayer, it is fair for you, a white man, to repeatedly demand that I, an Asian American, tell you what I think is a fair amount for Black Americans to receive as reparations. After I told you that's for an H.R. 40 committee to decide, after I told you that it is not my place as an Asian American to say. Normalize not having this kind of demand met or validated.
Nobody is angry, and you are not being oppressed. You are being held accountable for asking a disingenuous question designed to gaslight and to create division. If you are genuinely looking for real solutions regarding land back and how it might be implemented, you wouldn't be asking these questions on an Asian American creator's videos. You would be listening to Indigenous people. Because it's not my place to talk about what is land back and how it might be implemented, except I will say that the way you are framing land back is, in my understanding, a straw man argument, because that is not what most Indigenous people mean by land back. And you are doing what typically white people do when they want to gaslight land back and reparations, which is they'll say, well, I'm a good person and I would like to support your cause, but can you tell me exactly what it is and exactly how to do that? Because if you can't, then I can't support you because there's nothing to support. But I'm a good person for having asked. I'm looking for real solutions. And the reason why you're asking, is it just white people who would have to give back their land, or is it also Black people, is because you're trying to create division among people of the global majority. You are hoping that Black people will say, I'm not giving anything back, I didn't steal anything. Just as when the conversation is about reparations for Black Americans, people are always looking for Asian Americans to say, I'm not paying reparations, I wasn't even here for that. And that's not going to work here, because as I've said before, as somebody who was born and raised in the United States, unfortunately, I am somebody who benefited from stolen land and from what was built by chattel slavery. So I'm not going to escape accountability by saying, hey, I just got here and none of that was my fault. Because supporting land back and reparations is how we move towards a more equitable and just society that a lot of us would like to live in. Again, if you are genuinely looking for real solutions regarding land back, listen to Indigenous people.
The answer to your first question is correct. Referencing all of my videos in which I have supported reparations for Black Americans doesn't count towards supporting your claim that I have ever singled out white people as needing to write the checks. If I say I support reparations for Black Americans and you hear all white people need to write the checks, that's a you problem, because I never said that. And your second question shows that either you're another one of those people who believes that only white people pay taxes, or every time that I have said, as somebody who was born and raised in the United States, I have benefited from systems of oppression that harmed Black Americans and Native Americans, and therefore I also owe reparations, you didn't listen, and you just filled it in with whatever noise it is that you wanted to hear. And I welcome everybody to check out your comment thread and to see the straw man arguments and to see you moving the goalpost and to see your bad faith. Because when you do that, you are the one who is discrediting other white people. You are the one who is dragging all white people down to your level with you. And they don't deserve that.
People of the global majority in the United States, especially Black Americans, do not need you telling them this. We are well aware of it. Black Americans and Native Americans would not have been able to survive without being aware of this, would not be able to continuously rise and thrive despite pathological destruction by European Americans of what they create without being well aware of this. And that is why I say that it is working class European Americans who want to achieve class unity who need to put in the work towards racial unity first. Because this isn't about minority joins the majority. We are battle tested. We are battle hardened. Otherwise, you're the majority. Why haven't you been able to destroy the systems that exploit you for yourself? But we are not about to join European Americans in destroying anything when United States history has repeatedly shown that when we should be fighting a common enemy, you'd rather be fighting us. So if you're ever ready to stop, you can let us know, but we don't get things done by holding our breaths on you.
After Bacon's Rebellion, racial division was created by codifying racial inequality into what becomes the United States, and the reason why it was done was to perpetually prevent class unity. Discussions in the anti-racism sphere are about addressing racial inequality and working towards healing that racial divide because racial unity is required in order to achieve class unity. People like you want to dismiss race as a distraction because it doesn't affect you. You believe that if only we would stop talking about race, then we can collectively focus on working together towards class unity. The thing is, for European Americans who want class unity, you need to start listening to these discussions and working towards racial unity, because people of the global majority in the United States are not going to be able to work with European Americans towards class unity until European Americans learn to stop harming us. That is about race. It is not a both sides argument, and it does not go both ways. Throughout United States history, European Americans have been upholding systems of oppression that harm people of the global majority. People of the global majority in the United States have never upheld systems of oppression that harm European Americans. So asking us to put race aside to work towards class unity is like asking us to work in a pit of snakes. They might not all be poisonous, but we have no way of knowing which ones are. And especially in the case of some of you, it's like asking us to work with a coworker whom, with the support and knowledge of ownership, comes to work every morning, punches us in the face, immediately denies doing it, wonders why we're not doing our job as well as they are, goes home and feels that they are entitled to earning more because of their superior work ethic, but feels that still they're not being paid enough. So they come back to work the next day, and around the water cooler they say to everybody, "Man, I'm so tired of how we're all being exploited by ownership. Our wages suck, our benefits suck. What we all need to do is band together and stick it to ownership." Turns around, punches us in the face again, and immediately denies it. And if you're a European American who's thinking, "But I'm not racist. I know that I am not one of the poisonous snakes. I know that I am not throwing any punches," rather than asking us to set race aside and to risk our safety to help you, help yourself by removing the poisonous snakes from the pit. You are given proximity to them. You know which ones are poisonous. You are given tools to remove them that don't involve using your bare hands the way that we have to. Rather than asking us to turn the other cheek, help yourself by intercepting the punch. You are given the proximity to do that without having to take the punch or to throw your own fists. You can help yourself achieve class unity by listening to and learning from these discussions and learning how to uplift and unify by race. Reparations is about addressing racial inequality and healing the racial divide that is required if we are ever going to achieve class unity and live in a society that is anti-exploitation and anti-oppression, as is land back and sovereignty and respective treaty rights for Native Americans. When we live in a society that collectively wants to acknowledge and redress exploitation of Black Americans and Native Americans, we will already live in a society that is far less exploitative of the rest of us.
We already have. H.R. 40 is a bill that would establish a committee to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. It was reintroduced in the 118th congressional session, which is the current one, when after the 117th session, it did not pass out of the House floor, but for the first time in history, it passed out of the House Judiciary Committee. So H.R. 40 is what to watch for and to let your representatives know that you want them to support. Alternatively, in recent years, there has been growing support, in particular multi-ethnic support, including among 70 Asian American organizations, to ask President Biden to form a committee modeled after H.R. 40 by executive order. So another thing that you can do to support federal government movement towards reparations is to look for organizations and movements petitioning the president to do this. These committees would not be authorized to make reparations payments, but their job would be to develop the policies that would eventually lead to reparations payments. Because we don't let white supremacy stand in the way of working towards what's right. The fact that throughout U.S. history, Black Americans have continuously been able to rise and thrive despite systemic and institutional racism, and despite having opportunities that were given to white people withheld from them, doesn't mean that they don't deserve reparations. That would be like saying if your wallet was stolen but you still have more money than other people, that shows that having your wallet stolen didn't put you in any worse a position than anybody else, and therefore you don't deserve to have anything returned to you.
I don't know why you're asking me these low-level deflective questions, because in case you haven't noticed, I'm not the one who decides who receives reparations. But in the 12th century, there was a French cleric who tried to demand reparations from the King of Denmark for damage done to his monastery and the enslavement of French people during the Viking raids. He didn't receive any, but if you genuinely feel that strongly about it, rather than hijacking conversations about reparations for Black Americans, put in the labor and do your own advocacy work. However, I think you might run into a couple of problems. The first being there is no Viking government that materially benefited from the Viking raids in existence today. The second being, I think you're going to have a hard time making the argument that the Viking raids and any systems of oppression that they had put in place are continuing to cause you harm. Similar with the Barbary pirates. When those entities were defeated, their practices of enslavement and the systems of oppression that they had put in place were defeated with them. But in the conversation about reparations for Black Americans, it is not only that the United States legally supported, facilitated, and materially benefited from chattel slavery, it's also that following the Confederate defeat in the Civil War, the United States paid former enslavers reparations, broke its promise to pay the formerly enslaved reparations, and implemented nearly 100 years of Jim Crow. And those systems of oppression, systemic bias, and institutional biases continue to harm Black people to this day.
Today, there is no doubt that America is fiercely divided, but the division that matters most is one of class. The gap between the phenomenally rich and the poor, and between the rich and the middle, is the fundamental fact of our society today. Now, it hovers in the background of almost all political conversations that appear to be about other things. Inflation politics, the politics of crime, the question of elections and protection for voting rights. Sometimes the issue appears in anodyne terms, like the stagnation of middle-class living standards, the decline in expectations, the skills mismatch, but the reality it describes is one of desperate and frightening poverty that haunts even people who have managed to eke out stability for the moment. Now, alongside wealth that affords consumption, comfort, and power that most of us can imagine, given that the injustices perpetrated by police officers almost entirely in poor communities, a reasonable explanation seems to be that police in American society function primarily to protect wealth and property from a surplus population that has been made redundant to capitalist exploitation and whose labor is no longer needed for accumulation. R.E.P.A.R.A.T.I.O.N.S ideology persists because it describes something real about social life. Even as it's true that there are no biological or innate differences between supposed racial groups, R.E.P.A.R.A.T.ism is an absolutely real material force that reproduces desperate life circumstances and outcomes across all classes of society, but to a much higher degree within the working class. Now, discussions about atonement for the enslavement of our American brothers and sisters have a long history in the United States, and efforts towards reparations for slavery and racial discrimination have moved forward in some places in recent years. Now, we're seeing this like in 2021, Everstone became the first U.S. city to create a reparations plan for its black residents. And that same year, California set up the nation's first state-level reparations task force. Now, there has been a number of opinions on who is eligible for reparations. While National African American Reparations Commission welcomes principled collaboration and dialogue on the issue of eligibility, there's troubling debate percolating within the black community in America. There are forces associated with relatively new organization, American Descendants of Slavery, aka ADOS, which are advocating the position that reparations should be limited to the period of enslavement in America between 1619 and 1865, and should only benefit those persons who can prove a direct genetic lineage to people who were enslaved during this period. Anyway, let's check out some of the comments and hear what people had to say about this. The first comment reads, at one point in my life, I would have settled for an apology over reparations. Now I see that I won't even get an acknowledgement. We need to overcome division sustained by the ruling class to keep us fighting amongst ourselves so they can stay in power. I know that some won't understand the depth of your analogy. It was all classes of white people enforcing R to the system. It wasn't just the rich people. Racial unity is required in order to achieve class unity. This is not a hard concept to understand, especially in the USA. Class and race go hand in hand. I'm sincerely glad you have acknowledged the global majority and recognized Native Americans. Now, this is some of the few comments from people and what they had to say about this. What do you think about this, though? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. From me, it's a bye-bye, and see you in my next video. Thank you for watching.